Bienvenidas to Latina Literati. If you enjoy great books, interesting ideas, and wonderful people to hear about, both present and past, then this is the channel for you. Imagine in 1808, the Spanish cavalry officer comes upon this river, sees this river, and says to his cohort, his riding partner, the person next to him, Placencio, ¿qué nombre le daremos a este río tan grande y tan lindo? Pues Gabrielazo, ¿por qué no le ponemos Santísimo Sacramento? What was going through their minds when they named the river is Santísimo Sacramento, which literally means most holy sacrament. Do you think they said, we're saved, our beasts of burden can drink water from this river? Or do you think they said, what a wonderful valley, it will be perfect for agriculture and settlement? Or do you think they said, aha, a river that will allow trade to the missions further south? I don't know, but it's an interesting historical question, and it's a bit strange that that would be the name chosen in 1808 for the river, Santísimo Sacramento, and Sacramento would be the name that the town that grew up in the valley where this river runs through. Of course, we always want to begin further back. So for 12,000 years that we know of, the indigenous nations of different groups have lived along the Sacramento River. Now, the Sacramento River actually goes through 19 counties in California. It's the river that goes through most counties that is within the state of California. The water basin upon which 19 counties depend, as well as agriculture in those counties, and of course sports, also people living along the river. So let's talk about the indigenous people who for 12,000 years lived along the what is now 19 counties of Northern California. From the northernmost part near Oregon, you had the indigenous groups of Shasta and Mohawk. And then in the area that we now consider Sacramento, you had a group called Maidu. And there are many groups, and because there were dozens and dozens of groups, when the first non-indigenous people arrived, called them bands or families. So they were smaller groups, 20 to 30 people that lived together and fished and had agriculture and gathering and other means of surviving in the valley that we now call Sacramento. Further to the south, you have the Miwok. So again, you have dozens of different nations, indigenous groups that are living along the Sacramento and are thriving, obviously, for 12,000 years. And then all of a sudden, a cavalry officer by the name of Gabriel Moraga shows up and says, wait a minute, this is a great place. So that's the first mention in 1808 that we have of the Sacramento River being named Sacramento, Santísimo Sacramento. And so you have that in 1808, and then by 1839, you have a colony of Helvetica, or New Switzerland, being established by German-Swiss colonizer or invader, John Sutter. And so John Sutter brings a group of German-Swiss people to invade the land, and he actually asks the then Spanish governor of Alta California, Juan Bautista Alvarado, if he can have some of the land in the Sacramento Valley. And again, you have to put this in historical context. So from the north, along the seacoast, you had Russian forts because they were interested in the otter furs. And so there's trading up and down the coast from Alaska all the way to the Bay Area by the Russians. And then from the south, you have the missions that are being established by the Spanish missionaries, the Junipero Serra and the different Franciscan priests that are left at the different missions. So the most northern mission is in San Rafael Arcangel, which is several hours and several days ride, several hours by car and several days ride to Sacramento. So Sacramento's kind of a land that neither the Russians nor the Spanish have really settled, so to speak, but obviously there are thousands of indigenous people there. So Sutter takes some of the land, sets up Sutter's Fort, and so this is in 1839. And we all know what happens in 1840. You have hundreds of thousands of people invade the area because gold has been found. And so the disease and the brutality and the violence against the indigenous means that they are literally pushed from the entire area. There are very few indigenous people that survive the horrendous invasion, brutality, and illness that all of these invaders bring to the Sacramento area. So Juan Bautista Alvarado is in Monterrey, the original capital of California, and he gives this land to John Sutter, and even John Sutter is completely disgusted by the hundreds of thousands of people that invade the area, and he actually leaves. He wanted to set up a whole town called Sutterville, but he actually leaves his son in charge because he's completely disgusted by the way that hundreds of thousands of invaders are trying to mine, and they don't care about the environment, obviously, and they don't care about the other people, and there's a lot of violence, and so it's not a pretty sight. People think of the 49ers as just coming in and finding gold. No, there was a lot of depredation, a lot of violence, a lot of abuse among the miners, and obviously there was a lot of abuse towards the Californianos that were already here and the indigenous who were completely almost wiped out because of the violence. So the Sacramento Valley is actually like a causeway, and so the Sacramento River naturally floods, and it's because of these floods that there are lots of problems, obviously. So there are eventually dikes and dams and other things put up to try and control the natural flooding. And so originally there was a moment in time when the capital of California is moved from Monterrey up to San Jose, up to Vallejo, to Sacramento, and then the legislature has to meet in San Francisco because the entire city is flooded. And then they go back to Sacramento. I actually lived in Sacramento for a few years during my studies, and I remember clearly that I could not get to some exams because I was living in North Sacramento. My school was in the south part of the city, and it was completely flooded. You couldn't get a car through, and you just had to wait. And that is with all of the abilities that they now have to control the flooding. I can't imagine what it was like before that time. Water is a powerful force, and the Sacramento River is filled with that mighty force. It can literally flood the whole city. But so now we're kind of getting to the modern times. Let's talk about one of the cultural institutions of Sacramento that we visited. We had brunch when I was recently there at Tower Cafe. Now this is the original Tower Records, and so for anyone who's from California, I'm assuming that they had them in Southern California, I'm not sure, but Tower Records was the place to purchase LPs and 45s before there was any digital music at all. And you could spend the entire day there talking to the people who work there, and they would help you find all sorts of music. You had alternative music, and you had international music, and of course you have the top 40, and you had classical music, and then you had, it was just the breadth and the depth of the music that you could find at Tower Records was legendary. And so it was with great sadness when they all closed because, of course, the digital music takes over and then people are not buying LPs, although now people understand that there is a resonance and a depth to vinyl that you actually don't hear in the digital music. So now there are people going back to listening to music on turntables. But in any case, we went to the Tower Cafe. It's a very eclectic decor. It's beautiful. It's indoor, outdoor. The food was very good and the service was great, and it was wonderful to be in the original Tower Records that has been saved as the Tower Cafe. So if you're in Sacramento, check it out because it's a wonderful place to enjoy a bit of history and to also have a bite to eat. And you can't go to Sacramento without passing by Old Sacramento. It's basically a western town with the raised wooden sidewalks. Imagine yourself 150 years ago as the town is starting to be established, as the railroad, the Transcontinental Railroad arrives, what this means for a place that is evolving because of the discovery of gold and because it has become California's capital. So there is a bridge that you see here. It was painted gold. It wasn't originally gold because I remember it used to be just steel color, just gray. So I don't know if it's a metaphor for Eureka. That's actually the phrase of the state of California, Eureka, as in I found it. But it is now painted bright gold, and I thought that was funny. So it was a good day, very warm, because Sacramento gets quite warm in the summer, but it was a good day. We had fun reminiscing, recollecting, and going to some of the sites that we most enjoyed. And now onto my favorite part of the video, the book recommendation. And I thought it was most fit to recommend books about that era in California of Sacramento, thinking that it might be of historical interest for those who want to read a bit more in depth of what it was like. So there is a woman by the name of Cheryl Ann Stapp, and she's actually written several books. So the book recommendations include Sacramento Chronicles of the Gold Rush. It's just what it says. It's a chronicle of the gold rush and gives you a bit more in depth of what it was like when you have the invasion of literally, I think they say it was like something like 300,000 or 400,000 people come into the area. And most, of course, don't find gold. So there are others that do other things. There's another book that she wrote called Disaster and Triumph, which also talks about that same time, and not just Sacramento's development, but women of the gold rush, which is always interesting. After the Gold Rush, Tarnished Dreams by David Voigt is actually a book about a couple of families that don't find gold, so they set about farming. And so this is what some people did. Some people went back, some people went to other places, but some people settled and they farmed. And so this is After the Gold Rush, Tarnished Dreams is a book about a couple of families that become farmers in the Sacramento area. And Sacramento is actually the rice basket of the Western United States. There is some thought that rice has been growing here for many, 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 many years. I won't go into it right now, but there is some evidence that the treasure ships of ancient China came to the area. There's evidence that has been found. So rice may have been growing here for 1,000 years. We're actually not sure. But because it floods and rice needs flooded water, then it's a perfect place to grow rice, and you have lots and lots of rice being grown in the area, along with other things. You know, California is a very fertile place, especially the center of it when you have water. So there's another book by David Weber, The Spanish Frontier of North America, which talks about how it's the Spanish who side with the US in the Revolutionary War in exchange for keeping Florida. If you think about it, literally from Florida all the way to the Pacific Ocean is part of what is called New Spain. And so what does that mean in terms of the interplay between the newly established United States and Spain and the New Spain it has established in the southern part of North America? And so I think it's interesting because these are not things that are normally taught in U.S. schools, and they're not things that people are conscious about. And I think that's why people have the perspective of, oh, you know, Latinos or Latinas are just newcomers, which is crazy because we've been here for almost over 500 years. And of course, our indigenous ancestors have been here for 10,000, 12,000, 15,000 years. So it's insanity to say that any one of us is a newcomer. We have been on this hemisphere for millennia. Anyway, thank you so much for coming to the end of this video and to this joint journey. I would love to hear your thoughts on these topics and, of course, what books you recommend. Do you have books on the history of California or the history of Sacramento or the history of the gold rush that you would recommend? I would love to hear from you. So thank you again. Muchas gracias. And as always, we wish you mucha salud, mucho cariño y mucho amor. Gracias.